Alright then, let's continue and create building clusters from the buildings we've just imported. Just double check that your buildings node is there and that it's all filled up with the buildings we have the way we did. So we have a merge node with all the buildings included. We have a switch houses node with all the houses wired into it. And we have a switch commercial with all the commercial buildings wired into it, or only the commercial base sections. These buildings here, they would be the commercial mid sections and the commercial top sections. So that's all good. Let's jump back up, turn off the buildings node, and jump into building clusters. We're going to drop down a object merge. Let's make this a bit bigger. We're going to import it into this object, and we're going to find the switch houses node. Let's wire up the switch houses, accept that, and there we go. Now let's copy this, and instead of the switch houses, we find the switch commercial. All good. So now we're importing the houses and the commercial buildings. What we now want to do is make sure that our buildings have a normal and an up vector. To do that, we're going to drop down a point node, wire that up, and where we find the normal, that's on the standard tab, we can say add normal, right click, delete channels, and this is important to remember. So normally, the normal in this case, if you're modeling buildings or anything else, the Z axis would be the forward axis. But in my case, I have modeled all the buildings with X as the forward axis. So I want the normal to be X1 so that the buildings know which is their front face. Now let's go to the particle tab. We're going to find up vector. Here we go. And we're going to say add up vector. Again, right click and delete channels. And up has to be 1 in Y. Now we can copy that node and wire it up to the object merge 2 as well. Let's rename these, just to be clear for ourselves, import houses and import commercial. Let's make it all lowercase. Now let's have a look if that worked. So if we visualize the normals, yeah, we can see that they're going into positive X. And let's visualize the up vector as well. Right click here. And in my case, I have up already enabled. We can click that and it should show an upward yellow vector. If you don't have this up vector enabled, what you can do, if you've got the attribute, if we middle mouse on this, we can see inside there that we have an up vector. It says 6 point attributes and the last one is an up 3 float vector. So the attributes exists. We can press D in the viewport, go to visualizers, and then here, if you don't have it yet, you won't see this. So you can go to plus, marker. Now when this pops up, I can name it up, label it up. Because I already have one, it calls it up 2 for me, but for you it should just call it up. We make sure the type is set to marker, and we set the style to vector. And the attribute is quite simply the attribute you want to fetch. So in our case, that would be the lowercase up. And here you can pick the color, and if you want, you can maybe even make them longer, so the yellow trails, if you make it 2, will be twice as long as you just saw them in my screen. Alright, let's close this window, and once you have it set up, if you later decide to make some changes, you can click the pencil icon and make those changes. Let's change the length scale back to 1. I'm also going to remove my duplicate. I'm happy with that. Let's turn the visualizers off. Now let's also drop down to transform nodes, because we're going to use these later to copy stamp rotations into them. Control V that, click it underneath here, and we're going to drop down a switch. And into the switch, we're going to wire the houses as the first input and the commercial buildings as the second. So now we can choose between commercial buildings or houses. Alright, let's get a grid. Drop down our grid. We can leave the rows and columns at 10 by 10, but let's increase the size to 75 by 75 as our buildings are quite large. What we're going to do is copy stamp a building onto each point of the grid. Let's also drop down a delete node and remove the actual mesh. Visualize it. So what we can do now is we're going to say, we'll leave it primitives. We can say the pattern is everything. And then at the bottom here, there is a keep points. Let's drop down a copy node. And the left input will be primitives to copy, which will be our buildings. And the right input will be template to copy to, which will be our points. Alright, let's visualize that. Now we see that we have the same one, building number 0, or the first one basically in our stack, copied onto every single point. Let's toggle off transform using template point attributes because we don't want to do that. We go to the stamp tab and we're going to say stamp inputs. Let's create three variables: houses var for variety, commercial var, and rotation. What we're going to do is we're going to use a random $pt function, and this random function needs a variable number to be passed in to create a random number. $pt is such a variable number, as for each point it will differ. If you want to change the seed, you can multiply $pt by any number, which will then create a different random number. Let's leave that for later and remove it for now. So if we look at our houses, if we jump back here, we can see that we have switch houses right there, and we have different inputs. So we have input 0 up the top here. We can see we've got something, and if we drag it up, we should see that it stops changing after number 9. So 10, 11, etc. are the same. So let's leave it at 0. What we want to do is we want our random function in our stamping node to be fitted between 0 and 9. So we're going to say fit01, which is going to fit between any two numbers. Let me put it in a bigger window for you. So we've got fit01, in between brackets we have random $pt and then $pt in brackets again. So it should look like this. So let's put 2 commas in. What's happening is our fit01 function needs 3 values. The first value is the value that we are fitting, which is our random number, and we're going to fit it between 0 and 9, and that gives us 10 varieties. Let's apply that and accept. Now we need to stamp it later on, so we're still seeing the same houses everywhere. Now what can happen is it can create a floating point number such as 6.6. Now there is no variety 6.6. So what we want is we want it to choose either 6 or 7. So there is this round function. Let's type in round, open brackets, and all the way at the end we type a closing bracket. What this does is it's going to round the function up or down depending on whether it's above 0.5 or below. Now if we look at it, because we saw it was 6.6 something, it chooses number 7. So now in every case we will have a integer number between 0 and 9. Let's just take this function, Control C it, accept, and also paste it here. I'm going to multiply $pt by 52 to change the seed and get a different random number, and we'll get back to the rotation value later. For now, let's go ahead and start using these first 2 stamping variables to get different buildings on our points, and we'll do that in the next clip.